Welcome back. Today is the story of the Green Children of Woolpit, a delightful little tale from medieval England involving two mysteriously pigmented children, a suspiciously convenient pit, and a society that was just one famine away from believing literally anything that wandered out of the bushes. This is the kind of story that could only have emerged in a time before critical thinking was invented, and yet somehow, centuries later, it still refuses to die, like a zombie rumor that just keeps finding new legs to hobble on. So let us begin in Suffolk, England, sometime in the 12th century, which was already off to a promising start, with the country still recovering from the Norman conquest and deciding whether kings needed to speak English, French, or just grunt while swinging swords. The village of Woolpit, whose name is not exactly brimming with menace or mystery, was your typical medieval hamlet, complete with dirt, sheep, and a community of people whose collective lifespan rivaled that of a fruit fly. It was during the reign of either King Stephen or King Henry II. Historians are a bit fuzzy on the details, and frankly, no one can blame them. When something peculiar allegedly happened, two children, a boy and a girl, were discovered near a wolf pit. Not just any children, though. These two had green skin. Yes, green, as in spring peas, as in, is your child ill, or is he just basil now? Now let's talk about this pit. Woolpit got its name from the Old English wolf pit, which was exactly what it sounds like, a trap for wolves. In those days, wolves were still a legitimate concern, unlike now where our greatest predator is misinformation and poorly moderated comment sections. But back then, if you didn't dig a massive hole to catch wildlife, were you even trying to be a productive villager? The pits were often covered and left to wait patiently for an unlucky animal, or, in this case, two technicolor children, to stumble into them. According to the accounts, local reapers found the children beside one of these pits, weeping and disoriented, and understandably not blending in terribly well with the natural flora. When you're the colour of lettuce and not fluent in any known human tongue, it tends to raise a few eyebrows. Enter the chroniclers Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, two medieval gentlemen who heard the story some decades later and thought, yes, this absolutely deserves to be immortalised in ink. Ralph, being the more local of the two, wrote with that distinctly medieval blend of fascination and complete disregard for scientific plausibility, while William, from Yorkshire, was slightly more sceptical, but still decided to file this one under things too weird to ignore. Both of them recorded slightly different versions of the event, which is another way of saying that no one in the 12th century was checking their sources, because the only source was usually someone's neighbour's cousin who swore on a barrel of mead that it totally happened. According to the chroniclers, the children were not just green, but also wearing strange, unfamiliar clothing, speaking a bizarre language, and initially refused all food except for raw green beans, which is not exactly the diet of someone thriving in the English countryside. In fact, many medieval peasants would consider green beans a punishment rather than a meal, but these two apparently survived on them exclusively, which might explain both their complexion and their mood. After a while, and with considerable coaxing, they began eating regular food and, shockingly, lost their green colour. It turns out that being nourished properly makes you less chlorophyll adjacent. Who knew? Sadly, the boy didn't survive long. Perhaps his body simply couldn't handle the dramatic shift from beans to bread, or perhaps his mysterious origin, came with an inconvenient expiry date. Either way, he passed away, leaving his sister to explain herself to a society that thought bathing was a sign of vanity. Over time, the girl learned English, as most abductees eventually do, and began to relay the tale of her origins. According to her, she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a dimly lit realm where the sun never shone and everyone was green, which frankly sounds like a seasonal depression support group rather than a country. She described it as a twilight world separated from our own by a massive river, across which they had followed some wandering livestock, only to find themselves in a cave, then voila, out in Woolpit, blinking in confusion like two children who had just walked out of a fungal hallucination. Now here's where things begin to spiral beautifully out of control. Medieval people were not known for their commitment to logical deduction, but even by their standards, this story demanded an aggressive suspension of disbelief. Were these children from a subterranean world, a parallel dimension, a rogue elfin colony? The options were many and the evidence non-existent. Theories bloomed like mold in a damp thatched roof. Some believed the children had wandered from a nearby Flemish settlement, which would at least account for their strange clothing and language, though not their photosynthetic hue. Others claimed they were fae folk, slipping into our world from beneath the hills, as Celtic folklore often promised. Still others took the girl's description at face value and speculated about the existence of a literal twilight realm buried just beneath England's crust, which frankly raises more geological than metaphysical concerns. Let us pause here to appreciate that this story was written down, preserved and handed down to future generations as something that might actually have happened, because in a world where medicine consisted of leeches and prayers, and astronomy was just astrology with more robes, the idea of green children from a sunless land was not the most absurd thing on the docket. This was an era where people genuinely believed the moon could influence your blood and that goats had healing breath. Against that backdrop, the Green Children of Woolpit were downright plausible. As the girl grew, she assimilated. Her greenish tint faded, she took on English customs, presumably upgraded her wardrobe to something less interdimensional, and, according to some versions, even went on to live a normal life, possibly marrying and remaining in the area. Of course, normal in 12th century England meant surviving plagues, taxes, and the occasional public hanging, but still a reasonably happy ending. But the mystery of her origin lingered like the last bit of bean breath on a peasant's cloak. It was never fully explained, and every attempt to do so over the centuries has been as imaginative as it has been unsupported by any credible data. Modern theorists, bless their hearts, have tried to retroactively rationalize the tale using science. One popular theory suggests that the children may have suffered from hyperchromic anemia, a form of malnutrition that can give the skin a greenish tint, particularly when paired with sun deprivation and general despair. The green beans might have been the only familiar or palatable food available to them at first, explaining their limited diet. Another idea proposes arsenic poisoning, because nothing says medieval childhood like casual exposure to deadly chemicals in the groundwater. Others point to chlorosis, once known as green sickness, commonly attributed to iron deficiency and emotional instability, which frankly sounds like half of Twitter. Then, of course, there's the Flemish theory. During the 12th century, there were waves of Flemish immigrants in the region who were often unwelcome and sometimes persecuted. A local massacre of such a group might have left orphan children wandering the countryside, traumatized, linguistically isolated, and possibly tinged green by a diet that consisted largely of raw vegetables and despair. If you've ever seen what happens to children lost in the woods, it's not pretty. Add cultural alienation and you've got yourself the makings of a folk legend. Their strange language could have simply been Flemish, unfamiliar to the English peasants of Woolpit. Their clothing, unusual only because it wasn't covered in sheep dung, and their behavior the result of trauma, confusion, and possibly watching their family get burned alive by xenophobic villagers. A classic case of we don't understand them, so let's assume they're magical. But where's the fun in that? Why settle for historical realism when you can have subterranean civilizations glowing softly beneath the barley fields of East Anglia? This is where the legend thrives, not in fact, but in fertile imagination. Over the centuries, the Green Children of Woolpit have been absorbed into a pantheon of inexplicable phenomena, right alongside alien abductions, spontaneous human combustion, and the continued popularity of reality television. In modern times, the tale has been reimagined as an early alien encounter. Some fringe theorists, let's call them enthusiastic, argue that the children were extraterrestrial, their green skin and strange behavior indicative of a race more accustomed to zero gravity and light years of space travel than medieval England. The cave, they say, was not a cave at all, but a portal, or a dimensional fold, or perhaps the inside of a very confused spaceship. The river? A metaphor? The livestock? A tracking device? The beans? Alien rations. This is the sort of theory that flourishes best when heavily lubricated by late-night internet browsing and an unhealthy distrust of agricultural history. And yet there is something oddly beautiful about this tale's persistence. Whether as a misunderstood case of medieval migration, a cautionary fable about otherness, or the rustic cousin of Roswell, the Green Children of Woolpit continue to haunt the collective imagination. Their story taps into something deeper than folklore. It's the enduring human urge to find wonder in the strange, meaning in the unexplained, and magic in the face of the unfamiliar. It's the same instinct that made villagers think comets were omens, cats were witches, and left-handed people were probably up to no good. It's the story we tell when the world feels too ordinary and we want, just for a moment, to believe that there's something more waiting just beyond the tree line, perhaps in a pit, perhaps in a dream, perhaps under the endless twilight of St. Martin's Land. And that's the end of this story. Thanks for watching and for making it all the way through. Until next time, take care.